Hi there. Thanks for joining me once again on this series of devotionals from Psalm 23. And if you've seen any of the previous ones, you'll probably recognize that I'm not wearing a cap this time. And that's because I know what's coming, because we've now reached verse 5, where David says, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." He says, "You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." And we're just going to look at the first half of that today. Last week we saw how God is with us through the valleys of life. But of course it does raise a question. Why would a good shepherd lead his sheep through dark valleys? And surely the only possible answer is that they get to a better place. And all over the world, every year, shepherds are leading their sheep on great journeys to take them to better pastures, up into the mountains where the snows have melted, leaving behind lush green grass. And it's a bit like that in the Christian life, in our pilgrimage with God. The path that our shepherd leads us on is not always easy, but he is a faithful shepherd. He guides us, he provides for us, he rescues us and protects us, and sometimes he may correct us, other times he'll carry us. But one way or another, he will always lead us safely to our destination. And when we get there, we can't even imagine what it will be like in the new heavens and new earth. I can remember my backpacking days in Scotland, where once we climbed Ben Nevis, largest mountain in Scotland, and it's a real hard climb. It's like walking upstairs for 4 hours, and you have to go through some ravines, and you're kind of scrambling over shingle. It's a tough climb, but when you get to the top, if it's a clear day, it is breathtaking. You just look out over the whole west coast of Scotland, over the sparkling sea, and you see all these hundreds of islands dotted around out there. It's just such a feast for the eyes. And one day, when you and I get to the end of our journey, when we reach our destination on Mount Zion, well, it's going to be breathtaking. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2, he says, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind could even conceive what God has prepared for those who love him." So why then does David say here in verse 5, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies"? It's interesting that when the shepherds lead their sheep to these mountain pastures, these kind of grassy plateaus are often called tablelands, or mesa in Spanish. The most famous one in America perhaps being the Mesa Verde in Colorado, the green table. And it's in these tablelands that the sheep finally get to graze on this lush green grass. And in the same way, God has prepared a table for us, a feast. But for us, that feast is not just meant to be enjoyed in the new heavens and new earth one day. Because of Jesus, his kingdom is here now. His presence is with us now. What we'll enjoy fully then, we can have a foretaste of right now. Because notice here that David says God has prepared a feast for him, a table in the presence of his enemies. And, in the new heavens and new earth, we won't have any enemies, right? Our greatest enemies, Satan, sin, and death, will all have been removed. But as with David, our enemies have not been eliminated yet. Satan continues to accuse us day and night. The Bible says he's like a prowling lion seeking for those he can devour. Every day we have to contend with the weakness of our flesh. Every day brings us closer to death. And yet, it's in the presence of these enemies that God has prepared a table for us. Now, in the Bible, a meal, when you sit down at the table with someone to eat a meal with them, it speaks of friendship, doesn't it? Fellowship, hospitality. And, because of Jesus, again, we have a seat at God's table. And it means that we can enjoy unhindered fellowship with God. We can enjoy his blessing, his hospitality, right? Even in the face of opposition, even in the face of the weakness of our own flesh, even in the face of death, we can still know joy and peace, because we know that nothing can separate us from our good shepherd and the great things, the unimaginable things that he has prepared for us. So these formidable enemies, Satan, sin, and death, they threaten us, but they have no power over us other than what we give them. Because Satan has been defeated. The power of sin has been broken. Death has been conquered. They may still be with us right now, okay? But we don't have to be afraid, because our shepherd is stronger. And he has provided a table for us in the presence of our enemies. So it means we can feast on his goodness, much like those sheep feasting on green pastures. And you can almost imagine, can't you, those wolves far off, kind of watching from a distance, hoping for some stray sheep to provide a meal. But they are powerless. They're powerless to do anything. And the sheep, they're not worried. Why? Because their shepherd is in the midst. The shepherd is with them. And we don't have to convince ourselves of these things in our minds only, Actually, we can experience it in our hearts. We can actually experience the presence of God in our hearts, like a foretaste of heaven. And next time, we'll see how. But for today, why don't you just read Psalm 23 again to yourself out loud? Okay, personalize it, memorize it, just say it to yourself. The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. God bless you and be with you today.